The wife and daughter left a man alone while he fought a serious cancer. Years later, they returned intending to claim the inheritance, but what they found completely took them by surprise. Santiago was a determined and resilient man, but his world changed drastically when he was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma at an advanced stage. This diagnosis was a devastating blow for someone who had always maintained a healthy lifestyle, meticulously taking care of his diet and undergoing annual medical checkups. The oncologist who treated him could not determine with certainty the origin of the lymphoma, but mentioned a small hope. An intensive chemotherapy treatment could give him a chance, although minimal, to overcome the disease. Determined to fight, Santiago chose to go ahead with the treatment, despite how challenging it would be. When it was time to communicate this news that would change their lives, Santiago gathered the two most important people to him: Lucia, his partner of 15 years, and Valeria, his teenage daughter. "I have to tell you something," he began. "I went to the doctor and he confirmed that it really is lymphoma." Upon revealing his diagnosis, he saw in their faces a mix of astonishment and sadness. Despite the storm of emotions, Santiago found the strength to be the support they needed, promising them that he would do everything possible to beat the illness. "Don't worry," he told them. "I know we can get through this." But internally, he couldn't stop thinking about how the treatment would affect his life. Hugging Lucia and Valeria, Santiago reflected on the doctor's words, who had warned him about the innumerable physical and emotional challenges that chemotherapy would bring. Aware that many relationships deteriorate under the pressure of such situations, Santiago shared his fears with Lucia. "Despite what I said, I am a bit scared," he confessed. Lucia, with the serenity of someone who has shared not only the bed but also the deepest battles, replied firmly, "Remember our marriage vows. In sickness and in health, it is something I will fulfill to the end." Santiago, grateful, felt relieved to be able to concentrate on his recovery without the weight of financial worries. Thanks to his savings, robust insurance, and a fund left by his grandfather, the house was paid off, and Valeria's academic future was secured, which allowed him to fully focus on the fight ahead. The treatment began a few weeks after the diagnosis. Each chemotherapy session pushed him to his limits, leaving him exhausted and almost unrecognizable to his own eyes. His body, once strong, now felt weak. Returning home became a ritual of perseverance. Simple tasks like eating, bathing, or walking transformed into daily battles against an invisible enemy that drained all his energy. Faced with this new situation, Lucia and Valeria did not hesitate to provide Santiago with all the care and love they could offer. Both took on the household tasks with determination, preparing meals with renewed care, accompanying him to every chemotherapy session, and making sure no medical instructions were overlooked. In every gesture and every look of support, they silently reaffirmed an unbreakable commitment. The disease could affect his body, but not the love that united them. Santiago, aware of the impact his health could have on the home, strove to maintain as much independence as possible. He took advantage of every moment of energy to do the tasks he could still handle. This effort to be autonomous lasted for 2 long months, but during that time he began to notice a change in Lucia and Valeria's behavior. The atmosphere, once marked by solidarity, began to tense. Every time Santiago asked for help, it was preceded by a sigh of resignation, and Valeria sometimes seemed to distance herself, ignoring simple requests like bringing him a glass of water or accompanying him for a walk in the open air. "Valeria, could we take a walk around the yard? I would like to get some sun." "Oh, Dad, you know I have schoolwork to do. Maybe another time, okay?" was the young girl's response. However, Santiago only realized the real change one morning when he was getting ready for another chemotherapy session, and Lucia suggested coldly that he take a taxi. The suggestion surprised him, but he accepted it. Returning home, he could no longer ignore the growing emotional distance that separated them. After a few hours of rest and gathering strength, Santiago decided to start a difficult but necessary conversation. "I'm going to be direct. I've noticed some changes in your behavior. Can you be honest with me? We need to be open about our current situation." Lucia replied, "Look, dear, it's not that we're minimizing your suffering, but we're a bit overwhelmed with all the tasks, both the usual ones and the new ones." Valeria nodded in agreement. "I completely understand," said Santiago. "I also dislike having to ask for help for everything. That's why I thought about hiring a nurse. It's something many do. My uncle did it when he had hip surgery." Valeria and Lucia accepted the suggestion. and the following week the new nurse, Clara, started working at the house. However, the solution they expected to bring relief ended up creating a new problem. Lucia felt displaced and jealous of Clara's constant presence. Santiago, always balanced, suggested that Lucia resume part of the care as much as possible. Unfortunately, this did not have the desired effect, and the problem persisted. Amid this mix of emotions and misunderstandings, Santiago decided to remain calm, aware that any increase in negativity could further complicate his already difficult path to recovery. Later, a phone call added a new layer of complexity to the already tense emotional situation. His mother-in-law's worried voice was heard, expressing her disapproval of the presence of another woman in her daughter's house. "Santiago, I understand your situation, but think about what the neighbors will say. I don't want my daughter to be the subject of gossip," she expressed with concern. Santiago tried to calm her. "She's just a professional and everyone knows it," he replied calmly. But his mother-in-law insisted, "No, Santiago, things don't work that way," ending the discussion with an air of disapproval. Santiago found himself in an emotional labyrinth where each decision seemed to trigger unexpected consequences. In the midst of this storm of feelings, he clung to a single refuge, focusing on his health and maintaining the hope of better days, where the physical complications would not reflect the emotional complexities. To preserve some peace in his home, which had always been his sanctuary, he decided to face the situation with the dignity that characterized him, despite being exhausted and weakened by the treatments. He sought the understanding and support of his loved ones, remembering his role as the provider of the family even amid the illness. With kindness but firmness, Santiago tried to reassure his mother-in-law. "Lucia, I understand your concerns, but I need you to trust me. This is only temporary, and now I need Clara's help." Finally, Lucia seemed resigned. "All right then." However, the apparent acceptance soon crumbled. One ordinary day, after an exhausting chemotherapy session, Santiago encountered a scene he would never forget. A moving truck parked in front of his house. With a mix of surprise and fear, he approached Lucia and asked, "What does this mean?" "Well, Santiago, this is the best solution I found. Valeria and I are going to live with my mom while you recover. If you need anything, ask Clara." Santiago, shocked, replied, "Are you really going to leave me like this?" Lucia, unwavering, continued packing. "As you said, it's just temporary." With a resolve that seemed unbreakable, she went on with her plans, while Santiago struggled between deep sadness and the inability to express all the confusion that overwhelmed him. Fatigue acted as a veil that softened his anguish, perhaps as a defense against a reality that would otherwise have been unbearable. Alone, in a house that now felt strangely silent without the laughter and love of his family, Santiago faced the most painful test. His struggle against the disease was marked by challenges that transcended the physical. The abandonment of his wife and daughter in his moment of greatest vulnerability revealed a side of his marriage that he had perhaps preferred to ignore or not recognize. Despite everything, he clung to the hope of better days. The support of his family, especially his brother Mateo, and the loving presence of Clara, the nurse, offered Santiago a sense of community and solidarity. Clara's kindness and care were not only helpful, but also a balm for the emotional wounds caused by the illness and abandonment. Finally, when Santiago rang the bell at the hospital, marking his physical recovery, a glimmer of hope illuminated his difficult path. This moment represented much more than the end of a treatment. It was the beginning of a new stage, a release from a relationship that had not offered the unconditional support expected between partners. Santiago's decision to unilaterally file for divorce was not just a legal process, but also a declaration of personal affirmation and recognition of his own worth. He prepared all the necessary documents and sent them to his mother-in-law's address. Now Santiago could begin to build a future focused not only on physical healing, but also on emotional healing, surrounded by people who had offered him genuine empathy and support during the most challenging moments. Although the path ahead was filled with uncertainties and challenges, he was confident that he was regaining control of his life, choosing who would be part of his recovery and personal growth process. It had been more than a year since he had overcome the illness, and Santiago felt he was ready to move on. He contacted his old job, and they offered him the possibility of returning, working from home if he preferred. He accepted the offer, although his house, despite being a cherished place, was filled with painful memories, and he wanted to start anew in a smaller place. Santiago planned to give the house to Clara, who had been a great support in difficult times, showing extraordinary kindness despite being practically a stranger. She would have the freedom to sell it if she wished. This new beginning in a new neighborhood represented more than just a change of address. It symbolized the opportunity to rewrite his story after a turbulent and painful period. His ability to adapt and find comfort in new routines and friendships reflected his resilience and the human longing for connection and purpose, even after traumatic experiences. Santiago made friends with his new neighbor, Isabella, who not only offered him company, but also showed him that life could retain its meaning, even after significant losses, such as the death of a loved one or the end of a relationship once thought eternal. The conversations between them created common ground of understanding and mutual support, something only those who have shared similar experiences of loss can offer each other. Carpentry, Santiago's new hobby, was more than just a pastime. It was a form of therapy, a way to create order and beauty from raw material, possibly reflecting the process he himself had undergone by taking the pieces of his life and building something new and solid. His search for new tools symbolized the search for new skills and experiences that would help him shape his new reality. Despite Santiago having managed to overcome the absence of his wife and daughter, the fact of not having news of them remained a recurring topic in his life, suggesting that although he was moving forward, some loose ends still remained. One day, after a visit to the hardware store, Isabella made a disturbing observation to him. "I need to tell you something important. Yesterday, when I was returning home, I saw two women, one older and one younger, wandering around your house. They walked around several times, knocked on the door several times, and since you weren't home, they got into the car and waited. After a while, they left." Santiago, surprised, asked, "Are you serious? What did they look like?" Isabella continued, "Yes, I thought about calling the police, but they might be your relatives and I didn't want to interfere. Since they didn't come back after you returned, I decided to tell you. I couldn't see well, but the older one was around 60 years old, with light hair down to her shoulders. The younger one was a bit shorter, with very dark hair that reached her neck." As Isabella described the women, Santiago felt a chill. The characteristics matched those of his wife and daughter. Confusion took hold of his thoughts. How could they have found his address? After all, only his brother and his brother's wife knew the location of his new refuge. Santiago began to reflect on the possible reasons that might have led his wife and daughter to look for him, especially after leaving almost a year ago without even a last farewell. Isabella, always pragmatic, suggested that if they reappeared, he should stay away and let her handle the situation. Deep down, Santiago had no desire to expose himself again to the pain of rejection, especially now that the memories of that time of abandonment were still alive in his mind. As the night progressed and a starry blanket covered the sky, Santiago decided to seek answers by calling his brother. "Matteo, I really need to talk to you. Lucia and Valeria have come back," he said in a trembling voice. "Are you sure about what you're telling me?" asked Santiago, feeling how a mixture of surprise and concern took hold of him. "Yes, I'm at your house now with Clara. When they found out you had transferred the house to her name, they got furious. They broke some things in the garden and threatened her. Clara called me, so I came immediately. She is scared. We'll go to the police tomorrow," Matteo explained seriously. "My God, how is this happening?" muttered Santiago, feeling a lump in his throat. "You better be careful so they don't follow you," his brother warned. "Too late," Santiago replied with a sigh. "What do you mean too late? Are they there?" asked Matteo, alarmed. "No, but I almost ran into them. They came yesterday while I was at a carpentry event. Isabella saw everything," Santiago explained, feeling some relief knowing that Clara was protected by the documents confirming the transfer of the property to her name, a transaction Santiago had completed to close that chapter of his life. Without wasting time, Santiago called Clara directly. "Clara, I'm sorry. I didn't know this was going to happen," he said with genuine regret. "Don't worry, Santiago, I understand, but I need to tell you something," Clara replied, her voice revealing a hint of concern. "What happened?" he asked, fearing the worst. "When they came, we argued a lot. In the end, I told them that you had died and that you had left the house to me. They didn't believe me, and somehow they got your new address. I just wanted them to leave you alone," Clara confessed with a tone of voice that reflected both her remorse and her intention to protect him. "Don't worry, this was going to happen sooner or later," Santiago thought, aware that this encounter was inevitable. As for his ex-wife, it remained a mystery whether the divorce notice sent to her mother's house had been taken seriously or simply discarded as another meaningless piece of paper. Santiago, however, had already gone through situations of indifference before, which had led him to a serene acceptance. The next morning, while busy with his daily tasks, Santiago was interrupted by a persistent sound of knocking on the door. Quickly, he went to the security cameras and, looking at the screen, the confirmation came. It was them. His ex-wife looked the same as he remembered, while Valeria, his daughter, had grown, almost transforming into a woman. The difference in height and features marked the passing of time. Following the plan agreed upon with Isabella, Santiago stayed inside the house but got close enough to the door to listen to fragments of the conversation outside. Isabella, with her usual kindness, came out of her house and approached them, greeting them warmly without showing any resentment from the past. "Hello, how are you? Are you new here in the neighborhood?" she asked naturally. "Oh yes, we're just passing through," his ex-wife replied, somewhat evasively. "Have you been living here for long?" she continued. "Well, you could say so," Isabella answered, keeping the conversation light. "Do you need anything?" she added. "It's that in this house lived a man named Santiago," said Santiago's ex-wife, beginning to tell a story in which her husband, or rather ex-husband, had lived in that house until his supposed recent death after a long stay in the hospital. The words shocked Santiago as there was no evidence of his death, much less in relation to a hospital that he knew well. The only source of that story was Clara, who had invented it. Isabella, always calm and direct, responded, "Oh yes, Santiago lived here a few months ago, but unfortunately, he passed away from lymphoma. He once mentioned that he moved here after being abandoned by his wife and daughter. He ended up leaving everything to a girlfriend he found. Nowadays, she is the one who lives in this house." With the same calmness, Isabella added that, as far as she remembered, Santiago had expressed his intention to leave all his inheritance to charitable institutions, since he was divorced and had no family apart from a brother. Her surprise at seeing two women examining the house was evident in her tone. A heavy silence fell between them after this revelation, until Isabella, seeking clarification, asked, "But tell me, do you have any death certificate or will?" The women's negative response only increased the tension in the environment. Isabella, always practical, explained the legal steps to follow. "It's important that you have those documents. Then it's just a matter of going to a public registry. Because if you are, indeed, the legitimate owners, you could get the deed of the house in your name." Santiago's ex-wife reacted poorly to that guidance, shouting, "Who do you think you are? Stay out of what doesn't concern you." Her raised tone and unfounded accusations echoed in the air, disturbing the peace of the neighborhood that had welcomed Santiago so warmly. Although Santiago remained hidden behind the walls of his house, he felt shame and a strong desire to confront his ex-wife's uncontrolled behavior. However, he stood firm in the plan he had agreed on with Isabella, resisting the temptation to intervene directly. "Please don't misunderstand me. I'm just trying to help. I never intended to offend you," said Isabella in a conciliatory tone. After a few tense minutes, the two women left. When the workday finally concluded and silence returned like a balm, Santiago sought solace in Isabella's house. With palpable sincerity and evident regret, he said, "Please, Isabella, forgive me for what my ex-wife did. I really didn't know this would happen." "Don't worry," Isabella replied, smiling slightly. "I confess it was a bit comical to see her lose her patience." Santiago sighed, wishing he could be as calm as she was. "I wish I could be as calm as you, but I know what she is capable of when she gets upset. I know she will return soon." The next day, while Santiago focused on his carpentry work, a sudden crash pulled him out of his concentration. Upon leaving the house, he found a broken window and his ex-wife in the middle of the garden, furious. She had smashed the window, and although the neighbors were trying to calm her down, the chaos had already broken out. Santiago, distracted with his work and wearing headphones, hadn't noticed the commotion until that moment. He saw two older neighbors trying to restrain her to prevent more damage. "Please, ma'am, stop, don't do that," they pleaded, while Valeria and Lucia, armed with baseball bats, had already smashed the plants he so carefully tended in pots. Without hesitation, Santiago came out of the house and, with a determined move, grabbed his ex-wife's arm, asking her in a firm voice, "Have you lost your mind?" The surprise on her face was evident. They thought he had died and were only trying to intimidate the supposed new owner. "You two get out of here right now," Santiago ordered with determination. "Santiago, how can you say that? We thought you were dead. Why didn't you look for us when you recovered? Lucia exclaimed, bewildered. Why should I explain myself to someone who broke the promise to stay by my side in wealth and poverty, in sickness and in health? Santiago replied, each word loaded with pain and resentment. And Valeria, how could you do this to your own daughter? Lucia replied with a hint of pleading in her voice. Santiago, with weight in every word, answered, she is just like you. She abandoned me too. I am willing to give up my rights as a father and her custody. You should have thought about that before leaving me, he concluded firmly, making it clear that there was no turning back. I don't want to have any more ties with you too, Santiago declared firmly. At those words, his ex-wife went from sadness to anger, exclaiming, you are insensitive and selfish, which to Santiago's ears sounded ironically contradictory given the history of abandonment he had experienced. Raising his voice in response, Santiago replied, you are nothing but an opportunist. I don't want to know anything about you anymore, and I will do everything necessary to make sure I don't have to give you a penny. In that tense moment, she raised the baseball bat in a threatening gesture, but at that critical instant, the police arrived and intervened without hesitation. The officers detained both his ex-wife and his daughter, Valeria. When asked if he wanted to file a formal complaint, Santiago replied without hesitation, of course, officer. I would like to go to the station with you, in the same car as them, he stated with determination. As mother and daughter were taken to the patrol car, their tears and laments filled the air, but Santiago felt no compassion. The whole scene had been recorded by security cameras, including the moment his ex-wife broke the window, and the video was already in the hands of the police. With the end of the day and tempers calmer, Santiago took care of replacing the broken window and cleaning the debris. A temporary cover occupied the place of the damaged window, protecting the house from bad weather. Isabella, always willing to help, lent him some buckets to replant the pots that had survived the attack. It seems your ex doesn't like plants much, but to be honest, her face wouldn't even serve as fertilizer, joked Isabella. Santiago let out a light laugh and replied, I'm glad everything ended well. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if she had hit me with that bat. Driven by curiosity about what had motivated his ex-wife to return, Santiago began to investigate. It didn't take long to discover that the recent death of his mother-in-law had triggered a series of disastrous events. It was revealed that the house in which Lucia and Valeria lived did not belong to them, but to an ex-husband of Lucia's mother. With her mother's death, the property would pass to a nephew of this man, who was determined to sell it. Mother and daughter were forced to leave, sold what they could of the family belongings, and with few options ended up temporarily staying in a hotel. Returning to Santiago's old house, they were surprised to find Clara, who explained the situation to them, something Santiago already knew. After that, they found the new address thanks to the neighbors and decided to look for him, thinking that since the divorce was unilateral, they might get something. However, they needed to be sure if Santiago was alive or dead. The outcome of this chaotic situation was the accusation of vandalism, attempted trespassing, and assault. Valeria, being a minor, was sentenced to community service, while the ex-wife would face a more severe sentence due to the premeditated nature of her actions. Faced with this situation, Santiago was seriously considering obtaining a restraining order, at least for a while, to ensure he wouldn't have more unpleasant surprises in the future. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will probably move you too. Have a good session.